There's a piece of you that understands if you stop growing, you will start dying, that understands that we're wired to grow, that growth is our default setting. And so you find ways, both intellectually and emotionally, to help yourself overcome the fear, because you know ultimately that's what will bring that fulfillment that we so desperately, desperately want and need.
Love this concept. As I mentioned before we started recording, I read Smart Growth, Getting Ready for It, and so many cool things in there that I think can help all of us. What I'd love for our listeners, if you could just give a little bit of history in terms of how it led you to get on this amazing path that you're currently on.
Well, first of all, I thought you might find it interesting. I actually majored in music in college. I did. I studied piano, and so my when I graduated from college, I actually wanted to be a flight attendant, and they wouldn't hire me. So I graduated. My husband and I moved to New York, and I actually started my career on Wall Street as a secretary, and discovered that. And I will get to how I got here in just a second, but started as a secretary and. Um, as a music major, didn't have a lot of confidence, saw a lot of people around me. This is the late 80s, early 90s, and people, Liar's Poker, um, Bonfire of the Vanities, and Working Girl. It was a really exciting time to be on Wall Street. And I thought, okay, I can see these people right next to me, and I'm working as a sales assistant, but I see people opening up stock accounts, and that looks really fun and interesting, even though it was slightly intimidating because they'd say things like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know you should do this, and it throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And I was a little bit offended initially because I was a cheerleader in high school, but I realized I do need to throw down my pom-poms. And so I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics, and had a boss who believed in me, which allowed me to move from being a secretary to an investment banker. Now, the question you asked of how did I end up doing what I'm doing today? Well, I did investment banking for a number of years, for about 5 years, and then had our first child. And at that point, my boss had gotten fired. And they probably would have fired me too, but I had good performance review and I was pregnant. And so they moved me, but they actually shoved me into equity research. And it turns out that even though I did not want to be in equity research, and I think sometimes this happens in our lives, we don't want to be somewhere, but it turned out to be a career maker for me, where I learned how to build financial models and I learned how to pick stocks and to spot the momentum of what was happening with an equity. Now, here's how I started to get to where I am today. About 4 or 5 years into my being an equity research analyst, we prepare this training for my other colleagues. And I found myself spending an inordinate amount of time to train the colleagues. And I was looking at them. If you were a stock, would you be a buy? Would you be a sell? American Idol was popular at the time. What kind of, contestant would you be? Would you be a, front runner? Would you be the dark horse? Like, what would you be? Would you be a forensic analyst? Would you be great at earnings estimates? Would you be the person who understands the psychology of all the CEOs that you're studying? And as I spent all this time, I started to realize that I was much more interested in the momentum of people than I was of stocks. And so that started to plant that seed. And this is now about 20 years ago. That was there. I left Wall Street, disrupted myself, eventually connected with Clay Christensen, had the privilege of working on the Disruptive Innovation Fund with him. But as you can imagine, working with him, watching one of the sort of giants of thought leadership over the last 20 or 30 years, I thought, there's something here. And as we studied disruption and in products and services and companies and countries, I thought disruption isn't just about that. It's actually about people. And your company can't disrupt unless your people do. And so that led to me writing an article called Disrupt Yourself in Harvard Business Review back in 2012. So one of those things that was very, very gradual over the course of about a decade, but that's what got me to doing what I'm doing today is I realized, yes, stocks are interesting, but people are infinitely more fascinating.
So if we embrace disrupt ourselves, what's the value in doing that? And why would people do it? Because I see a lot of folks running away from struggle of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think drives fulfillment and internal fulfillment is my most important number. And I want that to grow every year. I can't be happy all the time, but I can increase fulfillment if I'm doing the right stuff. But what would you say to those that they run away from struggle and disrupting yourself? If you just start right there, I think there's some struggle involved, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the reasons that um, we run away because 'cause we're afraid. I mean, that's the bottom line because it starts to feel really, really, really uncomfortable when we're gonna do something new. And so we don't like to feel uncomfortable. We wanna feel comfortable, and yet at the same time, nature did this really interesting thing because, yes, we like to feel comfortable, but it also hardwired us to also need to grow, and so we oftentimes are willing to overcome that. The way I think about personal disruption is if you think about a y axis, which is sort of up and down, and that's success, and you think about an x axis, which is time. When you're disrupting yourself, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm currently on a y axis of success, and let's call it a 10. And however you're defining success, because we all define it differently. And I know you have a very specific definition of that inner fulfillment. Well, what are you going to do? You can say to yourself, I'm currently on this y axis at a 10, and the slope of my line is over one, up one, over one, up one on the graph paper of my existence. I disrupt myself and I'm willing to do this hard work of being uncomfortable because I believe that if I will move down the y axis from a 10 to a 9, so I'm willing to give that up, the stature, the comfort, the money, whatever it is, because I believe that by doing so in the future, the slope of my line will be over one, up two, or over one, up three. I'm willing to do this. And so, one of the things that I encourage people to do is, first of all, be willing to name the feeling that you're having. Dr. Dan Siegel said, name it to tame it. Because when you're willing to name, this is scary, then it calms the threat response and your executive functioning skill can kick in and start to problem solve. But then the other piece that I say to people, and this is why you disrupt yourself, to your point, it's inner fulfillment. You do it because there's a piece of you that understands if you stop growing, you will start dying, that understands that we're wired to grow, that growth is our default setting. And so you find ways, both intellectually and emotionally, to help yourself overcome the fear because you know ultimately that's what will bring that fulfillment that we so desperately, desperately want and need.
Yeah, and intellectually understanding that for a lot of folks doesn't mean they'll necessarily do it. And maybe it's just the fear that you're talking about. And if I look at an individual, kind of making a stock reference, if you were an asset that you were managing and you wanted to grow it, what would you do with it? And it's kind of an interesting perspective over being afraid and not wanting to do anything. But if you really looked at yourself that way, what would you do? And I don't think the foundational value ever really goes down. It's just this thing to be developed over time, which is a thing. Does that make sense? Is that
It does, and the way I would think about it if we pull that through is that if you're talking about a stock, for example, or a company, we make capital expenditures, right? We invest in equipment, we invest in people, we invest in marketing, so that's cash goes out the door because we believe that there will be a return on that investment, and you know that better than most because you've bought and sold or you've sold 8 companies. But there's always, if you're looking to grow that asset, there is something that you give up, but you believe that it's worth it to give up because the return on investment will be there. And yet, the challenge is when you think about personal disruption or personal growth, is that the price of a new and better self is your old self. And our old self feels comfortable and it feels very, very safe. Um, Putting an even finer point on this, we think about disruption, it's always relative to something else, like Netflix disrupted Blockbuster and AI is disrupting everything. But when it comes to personal disruption, you're the disruptor and you're the incumbent because you're disrupting yourself.
what I really liked about Smart Growth, your book, is that it helps you call the stages and the balance of novel and familiarity
Mhm.
um, out very clearly. Like this is what it is, and I think it's. I believe I'm pretty good at balancing all of this stuff and building capacity to do more and more over time. But you've helped me in a number of ways see it so clearly. It just makes it easy, like less sort of getting flustered, frustrated with something going on that isn't going the way that I want it to. Like each of these things are setting in that particular spot. So being able to, if we can call it out and say we're exactly here in all these different parts of our lives,
Mhm.
are you finding that it makes it easier for people to handle more
Yeah.
tension?
Yeah, significantly easier. So maybe what it would be helpful to do is if I walked you through the S curve at a very high level, and then I can dig down on that. So the S curve itself has been popularized decades ago by E.M. Rogers, and originally it was used to understand how groups would change over time, how quickly an innovation would be adopted. But then I had this insight that the S curve could help us understand what growth looks like and, more importantly, what it feels like. And so there are three major parts to the curve, and they answer the questions: why is it hard to start something new? Why, once you do start, does it become easy? And why can you be really good at something, even great, and say, I can't keep doing this? So the three parts are the launch point, the sweet spot, and mastery. So at the launch point, what's happening in your brain is you're running a predictive model and you're saying, I have this hypothesis of what is it going to take for me to go from the launch point to mastery. And most of your predictions at the launch point are inaccurate because you're starting out, it's new. But because they're inaccurate, dopamine, the chemical messenger of delight, it de-delights, it drops. And so the experience that you're having is you feel frustrated and you feel overwhelmed and you feel discouraged and you feel impatient and you might even feel like an imposter. And what's interesting at that place is it's not that growth isn't happening. In fact, it's happening at its fastest mathematically, but it's not obvious. And so growth feels very slow, which is why it's hard to start new things. But, and this goes to the intellectual piece of it, when you understand that intellectually and you're starting to feel, and I use this all the time to talk myself through doing new things, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It doesn't mean I've failed. It just means you're doing something new. That's all it means. And maybe you won't be good at it, but right now you don't have enough data to know. And so this S curve right now, the launch point, understanding that is so important when you're starting a new business and so important right now in a time of so much technological upheaval and geopolitical change. It's important to understand here's what it feels like to be here. And again, like I said, if you can name it, then you can tame it. If you stop trying to prove yourself, then you can improve. And then you can move into the sweet spot. What's happening here? Predictive model, continue to run, but you've been running lots of predictions. And so you've iterated and iterated, you're increasingly accurate. And so now what happens is your dopamine starts to spike because you're beating expectations and you have these emotional upside surprises. And so the feeling you have here is you just feel exhilarated because you're growing fast and it feels fast. And this is the place that you want to remember what it feels like to be here, because we oftentimes don't talk about it feels really good. We talk about, ooh, this is hard, or ooh, I'm bored, but we don't talk about this feels great. How do I get more of this feeling? How do I have more flow? So that's the sweet spot of the S curve. And then mastery is the place where the predictive model, you've completely figured it out. It is debugged, but you're only getting a little bit of dopamine, not a lot. And so now in mastery, you have this dilemma because on the one hand, you really like being excellent at something. You like being the master of all you survey, but your brain needs more dopamine. And so you say, well, what do I do here? Because I want to stay here, but I can't stay here because my brain is telling me not to stay here. And I also recognize that if I stay here, my plateau will become a precipice. So you make the decision to walk into that dilemma and jump to a new curve and keep growing. And by the way, again, launch point, you feel overwhelmed. Sweet spot, you feel exhilarated. In mastery, you can feel somewhat bored and restless. And that's helpful to know because then when you're feeling that way, it doesn't mean that you don't like your boss. It doesn't mean you don't like the people you work with. It just means, oh, I need to grow. I need to do something new. So that's a quick overview, and then we can go to the load balancing question that you posed. But I'll let you respond first because I've been talking for a couple of minutes.
No, I love that, and I think our listeners had to hear the explanation of all that to understand this more fully. One of the questions I had, I'm thinking back to like the largest company that I built. It was a global aerospace business, and we would figure something out. We'd be in that sweet spot. And as we started to, okay, this is really working and achieve mastery around that one space, I would immediately do the next thing and disrupt. Always, I didn't describe it that way back then, but always pushing us back into that sweet spot.
Mhm.
So we stayed there. And so I think, at least in theory, can't we, if we have the right approach, keep pushing ourselves back there around a
Yeah.
particular thing, like a business. And I've heard a number of business owners say, "I'm just bored, and I just need a different business to be in." And my feeling is, you can start anywhere and literally go everywhere. And when somebody tells me they're just bored with their business, I take a mental note to say I'm never going to get in business with that person because
Oh, what a great observation. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So a couple thoughts come to my mind. So one of the things when a person's in mastery, and when I say mastery, I don't necessarily mean the world's foremost expert. It's just that you did what you came to do. And I think that's part of what you're hearing from folks is like, I did what I came to do. But the thing is that when you're in that place, because you're on automatic, I said that funny, you're on autopilot, you have this place where you've got all this latent um, and excess cognitive capacity to put to something else, which I think is really, really important. And so then to your question of can't you be in the sweet spot perpetually? I think the answer is absolutely yes. And certainly you want that to be the case in your relationships or the most important relationships. But if you think now about how you're not just on one S curve, but you actually have a portfolio of S curves, and you say, all right, optimally, I'll have 5 S curves and I want to have most of them in the sweet spot and maybe, one where I'm in mastery and one at the launch point, because at the launch point that keeps me learning. Mastery gives me this sense of anchoring and then the sweet spot, just that sense of flow. Then what that means is if you optimize your portfolio in your life and in your business, you can perpetually be in the sweet spot. That's the goal, and it's certainly possible. And I think most people who are living a life of that inner fulfillment that you described, they are intuitively doing that because when they get to mastery in one thing, then they find a new launch point so they can move into the sweet spot. And so that portfolio allows for them on balance as a human being to be in that place of the
yeah,
sweet spot.
and how many different things can be going on with significant S curves in terms of how it impacts your life. So a business, multiple businesses, your family, a community that you're connected with. Can we build capacity to do more of that over time, or
Mm,
I'm not a fan of absolutes. It's either this or that, or
yeah,
4 or 5. I think we're all. I even believe philosophically that when somebody says something about what they can accomplish, by
yeah.
definition, it's a limiting belief.
Mm.
Curious, like, can we build capacity? Is there an ideal number?
That's a great question. Let me give you a heuristic, but then I think it's interesting to explore how you could play with that. So so from a research perspective or a project management research perspective, typically they would say you can only focus on 4 to 5 really substantial projects at a given time. And if you look at neuroscience, you can hold maybe 3 to 5 ideas in your head at a time. So if you looked at those two and extrapolated from that, that might suggest that you would have 4 or 5 major S curves at a given time. Now, the question then becomes, um, if you have 5, for example, you just got married, you just started a new business, you just moved to a new city, and maybe you just had a new child, right? That's a lot of launch points at the same time. So then what do you want to do to give yourself the support or anchoring so that you can navigate those better and be able to manage it so that you don't sort of, if you think about a teeter totter, you don't tip over. Um, so let me pause there and see how you'd react to that, and then let's brainstorm this expanding capacity piece together.
Yeah, for me, depending on how much my involvement in something needs to be,
Mhm,
there is kind of a limit. So I mentioned earlier, I'm recording an album right now. I'm
mhm,
CEO of two companies, significantly invested in a number of others, and there's a limit to how many of them I can fully lean into.
mhm.
4 or 5, it starts to get harder to completely shift focus. I feel like that's the thing that I really need to work on is just keep getting better at shifting full focus and do it quick. And then I think I can do more, but there seems to be a limit. But if I'm managing through people, I don't feel like there's any limit at all. It's just about finding capable people and
Mhm.
I working with them on all these different S curves. So I'm trying to balance that, like how much
Yeah.
a ton of my time and where do I find the people where I can still manage more.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things as I hear that. So the one is, okay, if cognitively, unless something changes massively in our brains, we're looking at 4 or 5, managing those well at any given time. You talked about one leverage point is, can I code switch faster, or can I organize my life faster, or organize my life in such a way that the switching costs are lower. So that's one thing. But then the other piece that you said is, if you're good at being able to build and develop people, then you potentially, even though you still only have 5 things that you're managing, then the potential becomes infinite if you've got those 5, and then those 5 are able to develop those 5, and then another 5, then that's potentially infinite. So what I love about what you just described, or what came up for me, is it's it puts a finer point on, or puts a different nuance to really the leverage and the power and the willingness to develop the people around you.
Yeah, the way I think about it, I'm always trying to simplify these models. Goals matter, systems required to achieve the goals matter more, leadership matters most.
Mhm.
And I've heard you talk about the ecosystem, and the way I've described it in the past is, hey, leaders create the environment from which everybody creates value. And if they want to create more over time, we have to develop them
Yeah.
in an environment that's conducive to that. So easy to say, but so few really do it. And and so
Yeah.
why how can we intellectually understand that at scale with leaders and yet so few actually do it? So that's one question. And then maybe run into some, if you can't go into some elements of what it takes to create that environment.
Mhm. Okay, so let's take the first question first, is why is there such a big gap between what we know and what we do?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'd say the first thing is that it's a lot easier to know something, and it's a lot easier to do something. I mean, it's just intellectually, I can know that it's important to, for example, not eat sweets after 6 o'clock at night because I will sleep better. I can know that. I can recite that every day long, every day of the week for the rest of my life. But it's another thing entirely. I'm saying this real time because I had this happen last night, thinking, Whitney, it would be a really good idea for you to not eat sweets after 6 o'clock. But guess what? I was eating rhubarb crumble at 8 p.m. When I went to bed at 9 p.m., my HRV was lower than I wanted it to be. Because why? Because I was eating sweets an hour before I went to bed. So the reason why it's so hard is because we can intellectually know something, but then we have competing interests, which is, I really want that thing right now. And that becomes more important to us. And so part of the, I think, and um, this goes a little bit to the conversation that we're having. I remember when I first started doing this work and I said, I'm not going to focus on stocks, I want to focus on people. I had my mother say to me, who had done some, lots of corporate training during her career, she said, Whitney, there are a lot of people in this business, broadly speaking, that really talk a very good game, but they don't do what they say they're going to do, or they don't do what they say they do. And I think that that's always going to be true. Brandon Sanderson, one of my favorite authors, said, a hypocrite is just a person in the process of changing. So it's always going to be true. I think what's important is our willingness to say, here's what I am aspiring to. And I recognize fully that here's where I am. And I understand that there's a gap, but I am continually and perpetually working on closing that gap.
Okay. So this is a struggle for everybody, really.
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
100%. If I'm remembering right, did you have a goal at one point to not eat processed sugar for a year?
I did. I
And
did.
did you
I
do
I
that?
did it. Yeah, I did it.
And how did you feel different?
Well, I lost weight, so that was a good thing. I felt really proud of myself um, because it because that was really hard for me. I mean, it's like one of those things of like, this is my comfort, right? Sugar is my comfort, and so being able to do that for a whole year, I was super proud of myself. Clearly, it still does comfort me, but its hold on me is certainly much less than it was, 15 years ago. So for me, this is me still moving up the S curve. I don't know that if I'll ever get in mastery, but I'm in process and I'm, continually doing things to become healthier.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't had processed sugar in probably 7 years now,
Wow.
any way, shape, or form, and,
Wow.
even in sort of unhealthy struggles, there's benefits, so I got really sick, and I really had no choice,
Yep.
and I just stayed on it, and wow, I feel so much better, mental clarity, everything that goes with it, so
100%.
yeah, uh, I don't know if I could have done it if I wasn't sort of forced to do it. I'm glad I'm on that. All right, so the started with a question around, and you talk about this in your book, Smart Growth, the balance between familiarity and novel, and what is that right mix? And is it always the same for everyone, or can you build again capacity or capability to do more novel at
Mm.
a point in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So starting out with the principle itself, in general, what the research shows is that we like to have sort of 80% the familiar and 20% novelty. And in fact, what was interesting is they looked at groundbreaking research papers, and they found that the ones that were groundbreaking had 85 to 95% familiar and 5 to 15% novel. So that was, um, what allowed it to be groundbreaking. If it was 100% familiar, meaning sources that were within that discipline, then it was never groundbreaking. There always needed to be some novelty. So 5 to 15%. And one of the things I'm definitely seeing in my research is that you see across lots and lots of different disciplines, it's ordinarily that 80-20 ratio. And so it's a good rule of thumb. And what you'll see is that if you try to go too much novelty, it's just too strange and it's just too foreign. Music's too dissonant. If you're a musician, if it's you want the novelty, but if it's too much novelty, people can't hear it. They reject it. And so, um, to your question of can you build the muscle to take on more novelty? I think the answer is yes. I mean, if you think about how we have plastic brains, you think about the idea, all the work that I'm doing around the S curve and growth, and how as we get older, we can insulate ourselves from doing new things, which means that we probably get worse at the novelty piece. That would also argue that you can get better at the novelty piece if you practice it.
And how does all of this relate to neuroplasticity and neuro rigidity?
Mm.
And being on the lookout for it. So for me, I'm I start to become uncomfortable in not a good way if I'm not doing new things.
Oh.
Yeah, I've sort of learned that, there's so many different ways to describe things, but the way I've been thinking about it for a long time is this value creation cycle where I struggle to get a capability. It can take some time, builds confidence, self esteem. I use that to create value, and I keep taking bigger and bigger steps. And when people ask me, "Hey, where did you get your start?" Well, it was, 6 years old pulling weeds for 25 cents an hour. A neighbor asked me, not a friend, nobody we knew. And it felt amazing. And back in the mid 60s, you could buy 2 candy bars and have change. It just felt amazing coming from a
Yeah.
household where money was a huge sign of stress. I mean, it's just terrible. And then I kept building on that to where it is today. And I I love that. So I've learned, I guess, what I'm trying to say here is to really trust the struggle, and the harder it is, the more uncomfortable I am with whatever this
Mhm.
disruptive thing that's going on. I know it's going to be incredible later, even if I'm waiting 8 years for that bigger marshmallow or that second
Mhm,
marshmallow.
mhm. Well, it's interesting because if you describe it that way, we talk about neural pathways and carving out new neural pathways. Your neural pathway now for knowing and believing and feeling, I need to have a certain pace or cadence of new things in my life, that is a very well-worn neural pathway. And what you're saying is if I don't have that, then things start to feel off for you. So what has become normal for you is a cadence of doing new things, of being able to perpetually grow. So I think that's where the plasticity comes in is you can train yourself to do that. But now, because you're in the habit of doing that, you have that neural pathway now it's just on your side because this is just now how you're wired, which is pretty awesome.
And well, thank you. And what's the danger for those that don't do that and neurorigidity? I have friends, I've been around a long time now, that just stopped growing, it appears,
Mhm.
decades ago.
Yeah,
And I don't know how their internal fulfillment could be growing over time. So mine starts to slow if I'm not doing novel
right,
things.
right.
Yeah, what's the I think
You
we're at
know,
the Yeah, go ahead.
it's an interesting question. I think, and if you remember, I in the first chapter of the book, I talk about Mr. Blah. Here's what I would say. I believe, and this goes to sort of what we believe about the world and also neuroscience. I do truly believe that we are wired to grow. Like we are wired to grow. If you think about it, there's never been a 2-year-old anywhere on the planet that didn't say, "I want to move from crawling to walking." Like never there is that impulse in us that we want to make progress. And so, what I would say is that I think people want to grow, but they have over time can be afraid or they tried to do new things and their hands were slapped or they failed. And so it's not that they don't deep down want to change. I think they've sort of given up. And so um, and I think if someone's not growing, I don't know that they can be fulfilled. But that's how I see the world. Uh, Someone else might disagree with me.
Yeah, I believe exactly the same, and so all the studies out there where, I'll just on men at how cognitive decline really starts
Mm,
to happen quickly, especially by 50.
mhm.
I think it's only for that reason that they're not on this growth path. I
Yeah.
think we can keep growing to 80, 90, 100 as long as we're fully applying that. And one of my business partners before he passed a few years ago was Jack Welch, and we had amazing conversations well into his 80s, and he was always there and just brilliant in this fire, and his body just gave out. Uh, so I don't believe it's a foregone conclusion like a lot of experts would say that you're just going to cognitively decline and that's just the way it is. Yeah, for
Yeah.
men. Women have different ages where they say that happens. But what are your thoughts around that?
I think that the nature of how our bodies are, I think there will be decline. I mean, I just think that's the nature of our bodies. And I think that you can certainly absolutely 100% reverse that and slow it down. I mean, like you said, Jack Welch, I know there are people in their 90s that can be incredibly sharp. And then obviously you probably studied Arthur Brooks' work, the from strength to strength, and how yes, you may be intellectually the gears may shift, but you can also then move in what he calls the second curve. You can move to this place of wisdom. So you can the how you grow might change over time, but there is without a doubt that you can grow um, as a human being until the day you die. In fact, I have a goal. This is one of my goals. I want to be the happiest that I've ever been on the day I die. So that meaning I'm continually I love that you describe it as inner fulfillment. I'm continually changing and progressing and becoming more the person that I was meant to be every single day of my life so that I maybe happy isn't the right word, but I feel the most content as a human being that I lived the best life that I could live.
Yeah. Love that, and that's why I go back to fulfillment. I love feeling happy,
Mhm.
but struggling through different things, it's hard to sit there and feel super happy. Like, this is hard, but man, it feels good what we're accomplishing together.
Like this morning when I'm working out with my trainer and she's making me do all these things with my hamstrings and they were cramping. I'm like, she's like, "How are you feeling?" And I'm like, "Actually, I feel really good because I could feel myself doing things that are making me stronger, even though it hurt." I think it's a great example of what you've been describing.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. Um, so circling back to an organization's environment, let's say
Yeah.
this for profit, what are some elements to put in place to create this culture of employees are running towards um, smart disruption?
Mhm.
And I just look at it and say running towards creating more and more value over time, which means they have to develop. So, what are some elements that need to be in place? And then I guess after that, we can get into advice for leaders on actually putting them in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. So, one of the elements that I think we need to put into place, starting with the S curve, is to recognize, and we've been circling around this idea, is that every single person is on an S curve. So if you start with that fundamental premise of every single person in your organization wants to grow. They do. And whether they are or not, there's something that wants to. And every person is if you can recognize that they want to do that and you can acknowledge it and understand where they currently stand on their S curve and where what success would look like for them, and then have those conversations about how does what they're looking for personally, from a Venn diagram standpoint, map against what the organization's trying to get done and put them in a place where they can do that, then they win and the organization wins. What does that require? That requires a manager willing to have that conversation, a manager willing to tell them what they're doing well and willing to tell them when they're not doing things well, which, by the way, a willingness to give people feedback of what's not working takes a tremendous amount of love for that person because it's really uncomfortable and awkward to say, "This isn't working. Let's figure out how to change this." So there's that willingness to say, "I am invested in you. I want you to be successful. I want to understand what you want to do. Here's what we're trying to do as an organization. How can they map? And when something doesn't work and they need to course correct, be willing to share that with them in a way that they can hear it and course correct and change and continue to make progress." So they need to feel a sense of, um, need to feel connected to you and to the people around them. They need to feel like there is hope for their future, that they have a possibility in this organization, and they need to feel that once they do good work, their contributions are being acknowledged. And if all of those things are happening, there's hope for their future. They belong, and they're going to be acknowledged when they do good work. That is going to create the conditions for people to do great work. And even if it turns out that they are not going to be able to do it there, they still believe that you care about them. That that's going to set it up for people to do great work and then by definition a company and an organization to do great work. Because if every person in your org is growing, then your org will grow. It'll figure it out.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Have you seen programs that have helped leaders have those conversations? Because I think a lot of times when feedback is given from managers, it's out of frustration and it comes
Mhm,
off like, "Look at what's wrong with you. How could you have
mhm.
gotten it?"
Yeah,
Instead of actually genuinely care about you, I want you to win. What are we learning from this Socratic method, whatever,
right.
to move you forward?
Have I seen programs? Yeah, I mean, the reality is that every really good manager does this to some extent. They just do. I mean, so people, if you talk to a person and they say, "I have a great boss or a great manager," they are doing that. They're having those conversations. They're talking to them about what do they need to do to get better. They feel like there's a future in the organization, and so they're continually doing that iteration piece in order to make progress. Um, what I have found, about a year ago, I did some work with a particular CPG company, consumer products company, and we had this whole conversation where you've got a lot of people who stay there for a really long time, right? They like the company, they like the location, so people stay, and people were wanting to feel like they were making progress. And there were a lot of people who were saying, well, I want to get promoted because the promotion will signal to me that I'm making progress. But as we started to diagnose what was happening, and based on my work and my understanding of what this looks like, it wasn't so much always that people wanted promotions. What they wanted was they wanted to be acknowledged for the work that they were doing, and promotions allow that. And but what they most wanted is they wanted to grow. They wanted to feel like there was upside for them. They wanted to feel like they could, once they got to the top of a curve, there was going to be another curve. And once those two pieces were in place, or not, that piece was in place of, yes, I can grow. And yes, you're paying me appropriately because pay matters. Then the promotion became far less important because that didn't need to be a signal that you value what I'm doing anymore. It just became, yes, that's going to happen. But if you're giving me opportunities to grow, then that means you do value me. So that's one of the pieces that's been very interesting for me to diagnose is it's promotion isn't always what people want. They just want to be acknowledged and they want to grow. And people who are growing rarely leave companies.
Yeah. Yeah, to your point, the one company I described where we ended up with 2,000 customers in 60 countries never once had a leader quit ever, and I was trying
Wow.
an environment where and it was over a 23-year run from basically myself and 2 people I couldn't pay the first year, gave them some equity to stay, and they did really well when we sold the company 23
Mhm.
years later. But we went from there to over 500 team members and this global amazing business, never a leader quitting. And I was always trying to create this environment where I would set everyone up to accomplish incredibly hard, challenging things, and that would elevate self-esteem, internal fulfillment. It was just ridiculously hard a lot of the time, but so much fun at the same time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Everybody would run through walls for each other and never had an employee lawsuit ever, never had an EOC claim, nothing.
Wow.
And I think it was because of that environment that I was
Mhm.
intentionally sort of creating. Is this are we saying kind of the same
Yeah,
thing?
we're saying exactly the same thing. So people felt connected to each other, right? They felt very
Oh my
much connected.
we have so many lifelong relationships that
Right.
we've cultivated. Yeah.
Right. So you're creating a sense of connection. You are creating a sense of mission. So a sense of like, here's where we're trying to go. So people felt like there was a worthy cause that was much bigger than they were. So they felt connected to each other. There was this worthy cause. And the other thing that people were feeling is not only worthy cause, but I personally, individually get to play a role in this. And I'm continually being pushed and developed. And I know that my manager wants me to grow. So, big goal, hairy, audacious goal. We're connected to each other. We all want each other to win. And I know that you want me personally to win. All of those pieces were in place.
Yeah. Yeah, so powerful. Again, kind of hard to do,
Oh, so
but
hard.
I think when you start though, you we can everybody can get better at it over time if they're super intentional about it. One of the things that I talk about with the different organizations that I work with and leaders is there are all these hidden forces against you.
Mhm.
Uh, you've got hidden agendas, you have lack of capability, lack of alignment. There's this big list. And then when I came across when you said, hey, we have stated values and we have shadow values, like that's another big thing that can kind of sabotage what's going on. What do you mean by that for the listeners? Stated shadow values?
Yeah, you've read the book more recently than I have, but I'll start with so stated value is that I want you to be a team player. Shadow value, so as a parent, for example, I want you to be a team player. I want you to get along with your classmates. Shadow value is you come home from school and you got second place in the race that you ran, and I ask you why you didn't get first place.
Hmm.
So what am I really saying? Do I really want you to be a team player? Do I really want you to work with other people? Or am I saying you have to win at all costs?
Yeah.
So the shadow value is the thing that you're not saying, but it's screaming so loudly that your stated values are completely subdued and muted.
Yeah.
Do
It's
you have a better
super.
example? Do you have a better
No,
example?
oh, interesting. I'm gonna go to the family, side of it as well. So in Dinner Table, one of the companies I'm of the 2 that I'm CEO of, we have over 40,000 parents in our community. I wanna take it to millions. And one of the regular things that I hear as we go through this is, parents saying to the kids, "You can be anything, you can do anything you want," and all of it, while at the same time, their actions are continually lowering expectations for the kids. And if you're saying this to your kids, why doesn't the same thing apply to you? Why the negative self-talk and everything else going on? So we're stating this, but
Yep.
we're not living it. And I love this concept. And there's so many ways that it's happening inside
Yeah.
organizations. People say, I am this. Their actions are completely the opposite. Uh, so then the question becomes, how do you start minimizing that over
Mhm.
like diffusing it? I look at all these things as kind of a long game. There's no way you
Right.
can snap your
Right.
finger, explain it once.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All the
Yeah, I mean, I think this the first place is starting with awareness, of just of being willing to just be aware. I remember a couple of years ago, and I think I mentioned this in the book, of my daughter. So one of the ways you can become aware of this is, you're talking about children and parents, is to have well, let me say what my daughter said first, and then I'll go to the bigger universal principle. So my daughter said to me, "Mom, you say I have to a lot." And I was saying, like, I have to go on vacation. I have to go on this trip for work to Europe. She's like, "You have to? What are you saying when you say you have to?" It's making it sound like you're not an agent. You're making it sound like you're a victim. And so those words that I was using were giving her a glimpse into my view of the world and of myself. And so this idea of awareness, I think that's the first step, is because once we can see that awareness and this stark, brilliant relief, then we can start to decide, well, what do I want to do with this now? Now, what I was going to say is, as a person, and especially with Dinner Table, where you've got lots of parents and children, I believe that there is no one more invested in your success on this planet than your children, more than your spouse, more than your partner, because your children, if you think about it from a very young age, they are vulnerable. I mean, you're their caregiver. And so they want you to succeed very much. They need you to succeed, actually. And at the same time, who can see your underbelly better than anybody on this planet? Child. So your children can see your weaknesses, they can see your towering strengths, and they're invested in your being successful. So to your point of the awareness, if you will allow your children to share with you what they see, and when they point something out that feels, ooh, super uncomfortable, and just sort of look at it, that's so much information that will allow us to become better people. I think we talk a lot about, well, what am I supposed to do to teach my children? And I think oftentimes, well, what am I supposed to learn from my children?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I'm gonna start using that in our community discussions, actually. Because, kids look at parents, they're their heroes. They want them to win. They defend them.
Hmm.
Like, it's incredible. I love that
Hmm.
perspective. And that's definitely something. When I work with these communities, we have it at Mass, and our parents are in 67 countries. And then I've got a number of communities that I facilitate a monthly session with here in the
Yeah.
Phoenix, Arizona area. And it's so cool to see families intentionally creating value materially, emotionally, and spiritually, and going through all of this and developing their own balance sheets around each of those categories.
Mm.
And after, like, the longest running community that I'm with is about 18 months now, and there's close to 100 families in it. And the material change, and this is mostly a lower income community, just working on this stuff and taking little steps, they've gone like 180 degrees from fearful to there's opportunity in everything, and we can do anything as long as we
Amazing.
put
That's
the effort
amazing.
into it.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think the same things apply in business. So we want to create a company that has this disruptive environment. I think of it as how do we connect culture fully to creating value and get
Mhm.
better at it over time. Everybody's the CEO of their own role. It's a long game. You can't just say one thing or do something and have it happen. How have you been able to effectively communicate sort of managing expectations this way, and how long it takes to create
Yeah.
culture of disruption? Yeah.
So what it's interesting, it's a great question. So what so I'm able to give people a framework of the S curve of here's what growth looks like and what it feels like. So giving them an ability to articulate where they are. And I think about it like a GPS, like a growth positioning system. If you know where you are right now, where you're standing, then it's a lot easier to get to where you want to go. So giving people a framework to think about what that's going to feel like. And then the personal disruption becomes that mechanism of rewiring your neural pathways and building momentum along the curve. To your point about it being a long game, I, while I want us to think in big, lofty ways, I also am a big believer, and this builds somewhat on James Clear's work of 1% in Atomic Habits. I continually talk to people about just 5% better. What does 5% better look like this week? Because then what happens is that it's so easy to stay in the theory. But if you think about your group, your dinner table and this community of parents, if every single one of them committed to something that was like 1% better, 5% better, then the odds that they will do it moves up significantly. And now what happens is that everybody's doing 5% better. Then the cumulative and compounding effect of that, the aggregation of that starts to be this tsunami of wonderful, astonishing, amazing change. So within a system or a community, instead of talking about 100%, just everybody do 5% because everybody can do 5%. And then you get the change that you're looking for systemically.
Until that becomes like breathing, and then it feeds on itself,
Yeah.
and
And
it
that's
can.
like what you were describing earlier, like, I just have to do new things. Well, doing new things for you it's literally like breathing for you now. It is on autopilot for you.
Yeah. Yeah, even playing guitar, if it's something I know I can do, okay, well, why do I wanna go through the work of doing that? But if it's chasing something I haven't been able to do yet, but I'd like to do it, so that's how I keep myself in the sweet spot there,
Mhm.
as a player, and with everything else going on, I have to dedicate at least 3 hours a day to it to keep advancing a little bit. Do you still play piano, by the way?
Not enough.
Okay.
Hearing you say that, I'm like, yeah, I had a little bit of an emotionally fraught relationship with music when I was younger, and so I sort of was like, "Ah," and so now I'm reaping the I'm reaping what I sowed, which is I didn't play much for years. I mean, I can still play like hymns and stuff on the piano. It's not like I can't play the piano, but I'm trying to figure out how to re-engage with my instrument.
Yeah. I think it's such a great release. Music is
Mhm,
amazing.
mhm,
All right, so that when leaders kind of getting back to the organization, when leaders get stuck on the S curve
mhm.
somewhere, they most often get stuck, and how do they get out of it?
Um, So they certainly don't get stuck in the sweet spot because it's fast and it feels fast. I would say they get stuck in two places. One is they get stuck at the launch point because it starts to feel hard. And so they can move into a place of performative, like I'm going to pretend like I know what I'm doing. And when they start to pretend like they know what they're doing and proving themselves, then they stop learning. And that's where they can stall out. They won't get stuck if they'll say, I'm learning and I need to figure out what I'm doing. So, if you go to performative, when you're at the launch point, you're going to definitely get stuck. The other place that people can get stuck is when they get to a place of mastery and they feel like they've done what they came to do. And to the point of some of people in your network that you described earlier, of they're feeling like there's more to do, but it's just too hard, or they're just too afraid, or they're just too comfortable to do something new. You can get stuck there. And that's why, as you said earlier, I think, people sometimes when they retire, they get old because they stop growing. They stop being challenged. So I think you can get stuck, stalled out in mastery, and you can get stuck or stalled out at the launch point.
And it's a mastery phase. Is that where when you talk about entitlement can kill innovation or value creation, is it typically either at mastery, so they just feel entitled? We've always done it this way. I'm already here. I shouldn't have to grow.
Right.
So it's
I've paid my dues. I've done it. And so, um, and you wanna be excellent at something, but that's certainly where entitlement can kick in. And so if you have, you know, I don't remember if I talked about this in the book, but I remember once, we had a brand new employee and we were asking for new ideas, and this brand new employee said, "Well, what about if we do blah, 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 blah?" And I was like, "Oh, well, that won't work." And then the rest of the day, the employee was completely quiet. And the next day I was like, "Hey, you weren't talking, you weren't contributing, and you've got lots of really good things to say." And she said to me, "Well, you know what you did, right?" And I was like, "No." She said, "Well, I said an idea and you shut me down. Like you shut me up and you shut me down. And if you look at the asymmetry of power, of course you stopped talking." So, "Oh, that won't work. I know exactly what I'm doing." So that's a mastery place.
Yeah, I love creating an environment where team members can challenge me hard. If it's with the best of intent to move the company forward and, being worth more money, creating more
Right.
value for whatever stakeholder group, uh, that's a cool sweet spot to be when they can do it.
Absolutely. And one of the things I will sometimes coach people is I will say, if no one's challenging you, it's not because you're doing everything right. It's because you need to ask yourself why they're not challenging you.
And a lot of times when newer folks come into the organization, they've been trained not to do that at their previous workplace, and it can take a while to, I'd say, earn their trust to let them do it, and some never quite get over it, but I'm always shooting for, "We're all here, go for it,"
Yeah. Yeah.
to create value together. Whitney, any final thoughts for our listeners? This has been fantastic and an honor for me to have access to your brain, by the way.
Mm. Oh, well, this has been such an interesting. I love that we've been directional, but also meandering at the same time, which has been fun. I think where I would love to have people land is two, I guess, two things. One is that the S curve itself gives you a map to navigate the emotional terrain of doing new things. And when you and you can use it with a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old will understand this. And so it gives you this common language to do that. And it allows you to, when you're doing something new that you don't know how to do, walk yourself through it, talk yourself through it so that you'll do that. And then I think the second thing that I would say, and you and I kept circling around this, is that if you want to live a life that feels genuinely happy, you will be willing to disrupt yourself and jump to new S curves. And it doesn't need to be 100% jump. It just needs to be a 5% better jump. And so I suspect that everybody listening to your podcast is already that person. So I would just say, keep going. And you're on the right path. Just keep disrupting yourself because that's going to get you to that place of inner fulfillment that you deeply desire.
Yeah, thank you for all that. And myself, my listeners, we all want to get better at it, and there's no end to how we can improve in this area. And we want to be more and more fulfilled as we do it, and not beat ourselves up in any way, shape, or form. Whitney, if our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about the work that you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you can certainly find me on LinkedIn. And bonus, if you will email me at wj@thedisruptionadvisors.com and tell me what you learned today. So a takeaway, which I will share back with you, Lee, is I will send you a signed copy of Smart Growth.
That is so awesome. What a great offer. Thank you so much for being here. This was amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. A pleasure.
All right. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.